In a galaxy full of ancient powers and untold dangers, humanity has always been seen as too wild, too unpredictable, a species on the verge of self-destruction. But is that really the truth? When Kael Varn, a bold and fiery human, steps into the Galactic Conclave uninvited, he doesn't just challenge the strongest beings in the universe. He forces them to confront a truth they never expected. Humanity's fire cannot be extinguished, and they're ready to change everything, even if it means war or love. So, what will Kael and Lyria do when their flames collide? Can they heal the wounds of each race and forge a new future for both worlds? Dive into this thrilling, emotional journey to find out. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic sci-fi adventures. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about Kael and Lyria's journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The stellar conclave blazed against the cosmic dark, a fortress of glass and starfire orbiting a supernova's husk. Its chambers throbbed with alien pulse, columns of plasma coiling like serpents, their scarlet glow bleeding across obsidian floors. Here, the galaxy's titans clashed, Zarkath in bio-armor that hummed with menace, Lumari flickering as prisms of cold intellect, Vulpari weaving through shadows with feral grace. Tonight, they judged humanity, a species deemed too wild, their hearts too raw for the stars. Enter Kael Varn, uninvited, his boots striking marble like a war cry. Leather clung to a body forged in asteroid runs, muscles taut, eyes of storm gray daring the void to blink. A smirk played on lips that promised trouble. High above, Lyria of the Vulpari watched, her golden gaze catching his fire, a crimson inferno that set her tail quivering. Something dangerous stirred. The galaxy held its breath. 149 words. Kael's entrance shattered the chamber's hum. Delegates froze, their murmurs snuffed out as if by vacuum. His jacket, scuffed from a dozen near-death flights, hugged shoulders broad enough to carry a world. Dark hair fell across a brow sharp as a blade, and his gaze swept the room, a predator sizing up prey. The air thickened, charged with the weight of his defiance. Zarkath warriors shifted, their armor plates grinding like tectonic faults. Lumari dimmed, their light stuttering in unease. Only Chairman Vera, a Lumari whose form pulsed with serene sapphire, remained unshaken, her tendrils of light curling like smoke. Humanity, growled Ambassador Cryon of the Zarkath, his voice a metallic rasp through his helmet's vents. His towering frame loomed, 7 feet of engineered war, each plate etched with the scars of 100 campaigns. A plague of passion. Their wars choke their cradle world. They have no place among us. Kael stopped dead center, boots planted wide, hands loose at his sides. A smirk curled his lips, bold and unyielding, the kind that could ignite a riot or a revolution. Passion, he said, voice a low growl that carried like thunder. That's what keeps us kicking, Cryon. You Zarkath might love your shiny cages, but we built starships with sweat and dreams. Scared we'll outshine you. The chamber erupted. Zarkath fists pounded tables, their clang echoing like artillery. Lumari flickered chaotically, their prisms fracturing into jagged spikes of light. A Vulpari delegate hissed, tail lashing, but Kael stood unmoved, his smirk sharpening. Vera raised a tendril, her light flaring to silence the din enough, she intoned, her voice a melody woven from collapsing stars. Kael Varn, you are not summoned. Speak your purpose or be cast out. Kael's eyes glinted, mischief dancing in their depths. Cast me out? Good luck with that, lady. He stepped forward, jacket creaking, his presence filling the room like a storm front. I'm here because you need us. Humanity's messy. Sure, wars, loves, betrayals, the works. But we're the spark this galaxy's been missing. Try running your perfect little council without a fire to light the way. You'll choke on your own rules. High above, in a crescent alcove draped in shadow, Lyria of the Vulpari leaned against a crystal rail, her breath shallow. Her skin shimmered like burnished bronze, drinking the chamber's glow. Crimson hair cascaded over her shoulders, a river of fire that framed eyes of molten gold, sharp enough to cut through lies. Her tail, sleek and sinuous, swayed with a rhythm only she could hear, its tip brushing the floor like a whispered secret. As a Vulpari emissary, she was forged to sense the fire of desire, a primal energy that pulsed through every soul. Most delegates radiated cold ambition, their fires dim as dying coals. But Kael was a supernova. His energy roared through her, a crimson inferno laced with sapphire defiance, surging like a tide that scorched her veins. Her fingers tightened on the rail, nails biting into crystal. A heat coiled in her chest, forbidden and fierce, making her tail quiver like a flame caught in wind. "What are you?" she murmured, her voice a velvet sigh lost in the chaos below. Her gown, a whisper of crimson silk, clung to curves that seemed sculpted by starlight, each breath drawing the fabric taut. She was trained to control desire, to wield it like a blade, but Kael's fire was a storm she hadn't braced for. Below, Cryon's armor hissed, steam curling from his vents as he leaned forward. "You speak of sparks, human, but sparks breed ruin." His gauntlet tapped a hollow display, summoning data streams that glowed like venom. "Our models predict a 73% chance your kind will fracture the Conclave, plunging us into war." Kael crossed his arms, muscles flexing under leather. "Models?" he scoffed, voice dripping with disdain. "I've seen your wars, Cryon. Zarkath honor leaves planets in ashes. Maybe it's you who's scared of losing control, scared a human might show you what living really means." The accusation hung like a blade drawn. Vera's light dimmed, sensing the fault line cracking through the chamber. Zarkath warriors growled, their armor clanking in rhythm. Lumari pulsed erratically, their logic fraying. But Lyria felt something else, a spike in Kael's fire, a flare of crimson that pulsed in time with her own heartbeat. Her lips parted, a silent gasp, as the heat of him wrapped around her like a lover's embrace. She shouldn't feel this, not for a human, not for anyone. Yet her tail flicked, catching the light like a comet's arc, betraying her restraint. A soft chime broke her reverie. A hollow screen materialized beside her, projecting Zarissa, her Vulpari advisor. Silver fur framed a face taut with disapproval, eyes like chipped flint. "Lyria, withdraw at once," Zarissa snapped, her voice a low hiss. "This human is a barbarian. His fire is reckless, dangerous to our kind." Lyria's gaze lingered on Kael, her tail slowing to a deliberate sway. "Dangerous?" she murmured, a defiant spark igniting her eyes. "Or alive?" Her fingers brushed the hollow screen, dismissing Zarissa's image with a flick. She straightened, crimson gown shimmering as if woven from embers, and glided toward the alcove's edge. Her movements were liquid, each step a silent vow to unravel the mystery of the man below. She descended a spiral stair, emerging into the chamber's heart. The galaxy's eyes turned, drawn to her like moths to flame. Her tail curled lazily, a question mark of silk and shadow, and her golden gaze locked on Kael. His smirk faltered for a heartbeat, storm-gray eyes widening as he took her in. Her presence was a current, pulling at something deep in his chest. A heat he hadn't named, didn't want to. "Well, damn," he muttered, voice rough, barely audible. "Didn't see that coming." Lyria stopped paces away, her tail swaying like a pendulum of temptation. The chamber's light danced across her skin, bronze glowing as if kissed by suns. "You speak of fire, human," she said, her voice a sultry melody that seemed to stroke the air, wrapping around every syllable like a caress. "But do you know its cost? It's hunger." Kael's throat tightened, but his smirk returned, sharper, hungrier. He stepped closer, boots scuffing marble, closing the distance until the air between them crackled. "Lady," he said, voice low, a challenge wrapped in smoke, "I've been burned before. Question is, can you handle the blaze?" Her lips twitched, a spark of amusement flaring in her golden eyes. She tilted her head, crimson hair spilling like molten copper, and her tail brushed the floor, deliberate, teasing. "Handle you," she purred, her voice dipping to a whisper that sent a shiver down his spine. "I am Vulpari, born of flame. The question, Kael Varn, is whether you can survive me." The chamber held its breath, delegates forgotten, their murmurs drowned by the silent collision of two forces too wild to cage. Cryon's armor clanked, a warning, but neither Kael nor Lyria noticed. Their eyes remained locked, gray meeting gold. A spark struck in the dark. Something dangerous bloomed, a fire that could consume or create, destroy or define. The galaxy watched and waited. The stellar conclave's chamber pulsed like a living heart, its walls awash in veins of scarlet light that twisted like rivers of molten ore. The air thrummed with alien tension, a symphony of hisses and hums from delegates caught in the wake of Kael Varn's defiance. He stood at the chamber's core, a lone figure carved from grit and starlight, his leather jacket taut over a frame that seemed to challenge gravity itself. His storm-gray eyes glinted, unyielding, as if daring the galaxy to strike him down. Across the dais, Ambassador Cryon of the Zarkath loomed, his bio-armor a fortress of gleaming obsidian, its plates shifting with predatory intent. The Lumari flickered, their prismatic forms casting fractured rainbows, while Vulpari tails swayed in the shadows, restless as caged flames. Cryon's gauntlet slammed the table, the clang reverberating like a war gong. "You speak of fire, human," he rasped, his voice a grind of metal on bone, "but your kind's passion is a plague. It breeds wars, betrayal, ruin. You are no better than beasts." Kael's smirk sharpened, a blade drawn in moonlight. He stepped forward, boots scuffing marble, his presence a storm front swallowing the room. "Beasts," he said, voice a low growl that carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "Maybe, but beasts fight for what they love, family, freedom, a shot at something real." "What do you fight for, Cryon? Another notch on your armor?" The chamber quaked. Zarkath warriors snarled, their gauntlets sparking with restrained fury. Lumari dimmed, their logic fraying like overheated circuits. Chairman Vera's sapphire light wavered, her tendrils curling tighter, sensing the fault line Kael had cracked open. But in the crowd, Lyria of the Vulpari felt a different tremor, a surge of heat, raw and untamed, radiating from the human. Her golden eyes flared, pupils dilating as his fire of desire roared through her senses, a molten cascade that scorched her veins and set her pulse racing. Her tail lashed, brushing the silk of her crimson gown, and she bit her lip, fighting the urge to close the distance. She clutched a gem at her throat, a Vulpari relic etched with runes that glowed faintly, meant to anchor her kind's power. It hummed, a warning to stay restrained, to leash the wildfire Kael ignited within her. But his energy was a tempest, unraveling her control. Her fingers trembled, nails grazing the gem's edge, and in a moment of reckless need, she tugged too hard. The relic shattered, its fragments chiming like broken bells as they scattered across the marble. The sound pierced the chamber's din, a crystalline cry that halted every voice. All eyes turned. Lyria stood exposed, a vision of bronze and fire under the galaxy's scrutiny. Her gown clung to her like a lover's whisper, tracing curves that seemed to defy the laws of form, each breath pulling the silk tighter across her skin. Her tail curled defensively, its tip quivering like a spark ready to ignite, but her chin lifted, defiant, golden eyes blazing with unapologetic resolve. The chamber held its breath, delegates transfixed, their thoughts snared by her presence. Kael's head snapped toward her, his smirk faltering for heartbeat. His gaze traced her silhouette, crimson hair spilling like a nebulous glow, skin shimmering as if kissed by dying suns. A heat stirred in his chest, primal and unbidden, tightening his throat. "El," he muttered, voice rough, barely audible. "That's one way to make an entrance." Lyria's lips parted, a flicker of amusement dancing in her eyes. She stepped forward, her movements fluid as molten glass, each stride a silent vow that echoed in the chamber's pulse. "Enough of this squabbling," she declared, her voice a velvet blade, sharp and sultry, cutting through the tension like a comet through the void. "If this human's fire is a plague, then let us test its strength. Fear is no path to wisdom. Only truth burns bright." Her words landed like embers, igniting murmurs among the delegates. Zarkath hissed. Lumari pulsed erratically, but Kael's eyes never left her. His smirk returned, sharper now, hungrier, as if he'd found a challenge worth chasing. "Test me," he said, stepping closer, his voice a low rumble that seemed to stroke the air. "Careful, lady. I don't play by the rules." Lyria's tail flicked, catching the scarlet light like a whip of flame. She closed the gap, stopping inches from him, her gown shimmering with every breath. "Rules?" she purred, her tone dipping to a whisper that coiled around his senses, warm and teasing. "I am Vulpari, Kael Varn. We write our own." The air between them crackled, a silent collision of wills that drowned out the chamber's chaos. Kael's pulse quickened, his body taut as he drank her in, golden eyes that burned with secrets, a tale that swayed like a promise. Her scent, faint but intoxicating like spice and starfire, hit him like a shot of adrenaline. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a gravelly challenge. "Write him, then," he said, lips curling, "but don't cry when I burn your pages down." Her laugh was soft, a melody of defiance and delight that sent a shiver down his spine. "Cry," she murmured, tilting her head, crimson hair sliding across her shoulder like a cascade of embers. "I'll dance in the flames, human. Will you?" Cryon's armor screeched, shattering the moment. "This is madness," he roared, his gauntlets slamming again, cracking the table's edge. "A Vulpari consorting with this savage? You disgrace your blood, emissary." Lyria's gaze never wavered from Kael, her tail slowing to a deliberate sway, each movement a taunt. "Disgrace," she said, voice dripping with quiet fire. "Or destiny? You fear his spark, Cryon, because it exposes your own cold core." The Zarkatha's vents hissed, steam curling like venom. But before he could retort, Vera's lights surged, bathing the chamber in sapphire calm. "Silence," she commanded, her voice a chorus of distant nebulae. "The Conclave tires a division. Words alone will not settle this. I propose the flame binding, a Vulpari right to forge unity through shared desire. Kael Varn, Lyria of the Vulpari, will you bind your fires to prove humanity's worth?" A gasp rippled through the chamber. The flame binding was a legend, a ritual where two souls touched through a living gem, their deepest passions laid bare. Success could bridge worlds. Failure could sear them to ash. Zarkath delegates pounded fists. Lumari flickered in alarm, but Lyria stood unmoved, her golden eyes locked on Kael. The gem's absence at her throat felt like freedom, her restraint unraveling with every beat of his fire against her senses. Cryon lunged forward, armor clanking. "This is an outrage," he bellowed. "The human will taint her, taint us all." Lyria raised a hand, silencing him with a glance that could melt steel. "I accept," she said, her voice a sultry vow that echoed through the chamber, each word a spark igniting the air. Her tail curled like a question, daring Kael to match her. Kael's grin was reckless, his eyes dark with hunger. He stepped closer, boots grazing the edge of her gown, his breath brushing her cheek. "Guess I'm in," he said, voice rough, a promise wrapped in smoke. "Hope you can handle the heat, Lyria." Her lips twitched, a smile both challenge and invitation. She leaned in, her tail grazing his leg, a fleeting touch that burned like a brand. "Heat?" she whispered, her voice a velvet flame licking at his resolve. "I was born in it, Kael. Hope you survive the inferno." The chamber dissolved into chaos, shouts, hisses, the clatter of armor. But for Kael and Lyria, the galaxy narrowed to the space between them. Their eyes held, gray and gold, a spark struck in the dark, ready to blaze. Cryon's roar faded, Vera's light dimmed, and the delegate's fury became a distant hum. Something had begun, a fire neither could contain, and the stars themselves seemed to lean closer, waiting for the blaze to consume or create. The meteor garden hung suspended within the stellar conclave, a cathedral of chaos where gravity bowed to whimsy. Crimson crystals drifted like embers caught in a cosmic breeze, their facets pulsing with a rhythm that echoed a lover's sigh. Vines of starlight coiled through the void, their tips glowing faintly, brushing against the air like ghostly fingers. Lyria of the Vulpari glided ahead, her crimson gown a liquid flame that clung to her curves, each step a silent sonnet that set the crystals trembling. Her tail swayed, a silken arc that caught the glow, casting shadows that danced with secrets. Behind her, Kael Varn followed, his boots barely grazing the unseen floor, his leather jacket open to reveal a chest honed by years of defying death in starfields and skirmishes. The garden's air was warm, heavy with the scent of alien blooms, sweet, heady, like wine spilled under moonlight. Kael's storm-gray eyes tracked Lyria, drinking in the way her hair spilled across her shoulders, a cascade of molten ruby that seemed to burn the dark. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble that stirred the vines, "this flame binding. You gonna clue me in, or am I diving blind into your fire?" Lyria paused, turning to face him, her silhouette framed by a constellation of crystals that pulsed in time with her breath. Her golden eyes gleamed, sharp with mischief, yet softened by something deeper, curiosity, perhaps, or hunger. Her tail curled upward, its tip shimmering like a falling star, and she stepped closer, the gown whispering against her skin. "Blind?" she teased, her voice a velvet caress that wrapped around his senses, warm and teasing. "No, Kael Varn. You'll see everything, feel everything. The gem will weave our fires together. Desire, fear, joy, every ember of your soul will be mine to touch." Kael raised a brow, his smirk curling like smoke. He drifted nearer, the garden's weightless sway bringing them close enough to feel the heat radiating between them. "Sounds like a hell of a ride," he said, his gaze tracing the curve of her jaw, lingering on the pulse at her throat. "You sure you're ready to tangle with me?" Her lips parted, a soft laugh escaping, low and dangerous, like the crackle of a hearth before it roars. "Tangle." She closed the gap, her tail brushing his arm, a fleeting caress that sent a jolt through his veins, sharp and electric. "I'm Vulpari, Kael. I was forged in flames fiercer than you can dream. The question is, can you keep pace with me?" Their eyes locked, gold meeting gray, and the garden seemed to fade, its crystals dimming as if bowing to their gravity. Kael's pulse surged, a primal rhythm that matched the glow around them. Lyria's breath hitched, her skin flushing as she sensed his fire of desire, a torrent of scarlet energy, wild and unyielding, crashing against her senses like a supernova's kiss. Her fingers grazed his wrist, tentative, then bold, and the contact was a spark that ignited something deep within her. Her tail coiled around his leg, instinctive, possessive, a silken bind that made her gasp. Heat flooded her cheeks, and she pulled back, golden eyes wide, lips trembling. "Kael," she whispered, voice raw with a vulnerability she hadn't meant to show. This is why the binding terrifies me. Our fires could unravel us both." He stood frozen, his eyes dark with hunger, yet softened by something new, respect, maybe, or recognition. "Unravel," he said, voice rough, stepping closer until their breaths mingled. "Lyria, I've flown through black holes and walked away. If this fire burns, I say let it blaze. I'm not backing down, not from you." Her tail quivered, its tip brushing his thigh, a fleeting apology for her retreat. She wanted to speak, to warn him of the gem's power, but a hollow projection flickered into existence, slicing through the garden's haze. Zarissa's face materialized, her silver fur taut with disapproval, eyes like chipped obsidian. "Lyria, cease this folly," she snapped, her voice a hiss that cut the air. "The flame binding risks your essence, your very soul. This human's fire is a storm, untamed, unworthy of our blood. Lyria's tail lashed, a whip of defiance that scattered in nearby crystal, its fragments glinting like tears. She faced the projection, chin high, her gown shimmering as if woven from embers. Unworthy, she shot back, her voice a quiet inferno. We're stronger than you dare admit. I choose this, Zarissa, for my people, for truth, and for me. The projection dissolved, Zarissa's scowl fading into static, but her warning lingered like a chill. Kael watched Lyria, seeing the storm in her eyes, the way her tail curled tightly, as if guarding her heart. You don't have to do this, he said, softer now, his voice a steady anchor. Not for me, not for anyone. She turned, her gaze fierce, golden eyes burning with resolve. I'm not doing it for you, Kael, she said, stepping closer, her tail uncurling to graze his hip, a deliberate touch that sent heat racing through him. I'm doing it for us, for what we could become. Their moment hung, fragile as a star's first light, until a Zarkath drone buzzed into the garden, its crimson optics glaring like a predator's eyes. It hovered, projecting Cryon's voice, cold and serrated. Emissary, he growled, beware the human. Here is truth. A recording crackled to life, Kael's voice, eerily precise, sneering through the air. Vulpari are nothing but seducers, weak, easily bent to my will. I'll use her to get what I want. Lyria's breath caught, her tail drooping as if struck. The crystals around them dimmed, their pulse faltering, mirroring the pain that flickered across her face. Her golden eyes turned to Kael, searching, wounded. Is this you? She whispered, voice breaking, each word a shard of glass. Kael's fists clenched, knuckles whitening, rage boiling in his chest like a star-gone nova. That's not me, he growled, stepping toward the drone, his voice hard as iron. Cryon's playing dirty, faking it to tear us apart. I never say that, Lyria. Not about you, not ever. She stared at him, her tail trembling, caught between trust and betrayal. The garden's vines seemed to tighten, their glow fading to a mournful hue. I felt your fire, she said, voice hollow, tears glinting like embers in her eyes. I felt its truth. Was it all a lie? Kael's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with a fury that could rival suns. Feel me now, he said, voice raw, taking a step closer. Look at me, Lyria. You know what's real. But she shook her head, crimson hair falling across her face like a veil. I can't, she murmured, her voice barely a breath. She turned, her gown trailing like a dying flame, and glided deeper into the garden, vanishing among the vines. The crystals pulsed weakly, their lights swallowed by shadow, leaving Kael alone in the weightless dark, his fists still clenched, his fire burning for a truth she couldn't yet see. The data vault of the stellar conclave was a crypt of shadows, its corridors carved from black crystal that drank the light. Hollow panels flickered along the walls, their ghostly streams of code pulsing like veins of a sleeping giant. Kael Varn moved through the gloom, a predator in leather, his boots silent on the polished floor. His jacket clung to a frame taut with purpose, muscles flexing with every step, storm-gray eyes burning with a fury that could rival suns. Beside him, Terran, a Lumari hacker whose prism body shimmered with rebellious streaks of violet, glided, their light dimmed to a whisper to evade detection. The air was cold, sharp with the tang of ozone, but Kael's blood ran hot, fueled by the wound of Lyria's doubt. Cryon's tech is sharp, Terran murmured, their voice a soft chime that echoed faintly. A hollow tool in their tendril spun, slicing through security runes. The recording's in neural sim, built from your med scan when you docked. Bastard's clever, but I'm cleverer. Kael's jaw clenched, knuckles whitening as he gripped a stolen Zarkath blade, its edge glinting like a shard of midnight. He heard her, he growled, voice rough as gravel, each word a vow. I'm not letting that slide, Terran. Not now, not ever. They reached a sealed node, a dome of black crystal pulsing with crimson glyphs. Terran's light flared, tendrils dancing across the surface, A hum split the air. Zarkath drones, beetle-like, their optics glowing like bloodied stars. Kael ducked as a laser scorched past, singeing his jacket, the smell of burnt leather sharp in his nose. "Move!" he barked, diving behind a panel, heart pounding like a war drum. Terran's prism surged, hacking the drone's cores, and Kael lunged, blade flashing. Metal screamed, sparks erupted, and the drones crumpled, their optics fading to ash. "Got it," Terran said, extracting a data crystal that glowed like a trapped ember. "Proof Cryon faked the recording. Your voice, but not your soul. Now go, Kael. Find her before she shuts you out." Kael didn't pause. He sprinted through the Conclave's labyrinth, the crystal searing his palm, its heat a mirror to the fire in his chest. Corridors blurred, walls of glass and starlight, echoes of alien tongues, until he reached the Temple of Flame. The chamber yawned before him, a sanctum of molten splendor. Pillars of ruby light rose like spires of liquid fire, their surfaces rippling as if alive, casting a warm haze that bathed the air in scarlet. At the center knelt Lyria, her crimson hair spilling across her shoulders like a nebulous heart, her gown a silken veil that clung to her curves, trembling with each shallow breath. Her tail coiled tightly, a guardian of her pain, and tears streaked her face, glinting like molten pearls in the firelight. "Lyria," Kael called, his voice a low thunder that rolled through the temple, shaking the pillars' glow. Her eyes snapped open, golden and raw, blazing with a wound that cut deeper than steel. She rose, tail unfurling like a wounded beast, her gown shimmering as if woven from dying stars. "Leave," she said, voice jagged, each word a shard of betrayal. "I trusted you, Kael. I felt your fire, its truth. And you mocked me." Kael strode forward, undeterred, the data crystal gleaming in his fist. He dropped to one knee before her, close enough to feel the heat of her skin, the spice of her scent wrapping around him like a fever. "It wasn't me," he said, voice hard as iron, yet soft with something deeper, pleading raw. "Cryon faked it, Lyria. This crystal proves it, his tech, his lies. But you don't need proof. You felt me, damn it. You know me. Was that a lie?" She stared, her tail trembling, its tip grazing the floor like a fallen spark. The temple's pillars pulsed, their rhythm syncing with her heartbeat, a drumbeat of doubt and longing. "I felt everything," she whispered, voice breaking, tears spilling like embers. "Your strength, your pain, your fire. But how do I trust again? How do I know?" Kael leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, storm-gray eyes locking with hers. "Feel me now," he said, voice rough with honesty, a vow carved in stone. "I've lost people, friends, brothers in arms, in wars I couldn't stop. I fight for Terra, for a future. But hell, Lyria, I'm fighting for you now. I'd burn this galaxy to ash to keep you safe, to make you see." Her breath caught, a soft gasp that stirred the air. She reached out, fingers trembling, brushing his chest where his heart thundered beneath leather. His fire surged through her, a mountain of molten steel, fierce yet tender, a blaze that burned for truth, not deceit. Her tail uncurled, sliding around his waist, a silken tether pulling him closer, possessive, alive. "Kael," she murmured, voice of velvet flame, lips grazing his jaw, "you're impossible." He grinned, a rogue charm breaking through the storm. "Impossible's my thing, sweetheart," he said, his hand finding her hip, fingers firm, grounding. "Always has been." She laughed, soft and fractured, the sound of melody that warmed the temple's glow. Her arms wrapped around him, bronze skin searing against his, a collision of fires that made the pillars flare brighter, their light painting the chamber in hues of dawn. "We'll do this," she whispered, lips brushing his ear, her tail tightening around him, a vow of its own. "The binding, for our people, for truth, for us." Kael's grip tightened, his voice a low growl of resolve. "For us," he echoed, tilting her chin to meet his gaze, storm-gray eyes burning with a fire that matched her own. No lies, no games. Just you and me, Lyria. The temple pulsed, its pillars singing a hymn of molten light, as if the stars themselves bore witness. Cryon's shadow lingered, a threat yet to be faced, but in that moment, Kael and Lyria stood united, their fires entwined, a blaze no deceit could quench. The galaxy waited, and the flame grew stronger. The heart of the stellar conclave blazed like a crucible, its central dais a throne of star-wrought stone that glowed with veins of molten amber. Above, a canopy of plasma swirled, casting ribbons of scarlet and gold across the chamber, as if the heavens themselves had torn open to watch. A living gem rested on a pedestal at the dais's core, fist-sized, its surface a vortex of crimson fire that pulsed like a beating heart. Kael Varn stood before it, his leather jacket scorched from the Data Vault's fight, a faint line of blood drying on his arm. His chest heaved, storm-gray eyes burning with a resolve that could outshine suns. Across from him, Lyria of the Vulpari shimmered, her crimson gown flowing like a river of embers, clinging to curves that seemed to bend light itself. Her tail swayed, a silken flame dancing to an unseen rhythm, and her golden eyes held his, a vow forged in fire. The chamber brimmed with alien gazes, Zarkath in their clanking bioarmor, Lumari pulsing erratically, Vulpari tails flickering like sparks in a storm. Chairman Vera hovered above, her sapphire light steady but taut, tendrils curling like vines around a breaking bough. The flame binding begins, she intoned, her voice a symphony of collapsing stars, resonating through the dais. Kael Varn, Lyria of the Vulpari, touched the gem. Let your fires merge. Succeed, and you unite our worlds. Fail, and you burn to ash. Kael's hand hovered over the gem, his fingers steady despite the pulse hammering in his throat. His gaze locked on Lyria, a grin tugging at his lips, reckless and alive. Ready to set this galaxy ablaze, sweetheart? He asked, voice a low growl that carried a challenge wrapped in velvet. Lyria's lips curved, a smile both fierce and tender, her tail flicking to brush his thigh, a spark that sent heat racing through his veins. Only if you can keep up, Kael, she purred, her voice a sultry melody that coiled around his senses, teasing, daring. This fire burns both ways. Their hands met the gem, fingers intertwining, and the chamber vanished. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of light and heat, the gem's fire flooding their souls. Kael saw Lyria's memories unfold like petals of flame. Childhood under twin Vulpari moons, silver sands glowing beneath her bare feet. Her exile for daring to feel too deeply, branded a danger by her own kind. Her longing for freedom, a hunger that burned brighter than stars. Each vision was a blade, cutting him open, yet he welcomed the pain, drinking her truth. Lyria felt Kael's life in return. A boy racing through Terra's dust-choked canyons, dreaming of skies. A man piloting through asteroid storms, heart pounding as he cheated death. The ache of lost comrades, their names carved in his bones. His fire of desire roared through her, a cascade of scarlet and steel, fierce yet tender, a blaze that refused to fade. Her breath caught, tears spilling like molten gold, and she gripped his hand tighter, anchoring herself in his strength. Kael, she gasped, voice raw, trembling with the weight of his soul. You are everything. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, softened, burning with a light only she could see. And you, he murmured, voice rough with awe, are my damn universe. The gem flared, its light swallowing the dais, painting their bodies in hues of dawn. Their fires entwined, a dance of crimson and gold, weaving a tapestry that pulsed with life. Kael's pulse thundered, his body trembling as Lyria's desire merged with his, her longing, her defiance, her heat crashing against his own, a tide that threatened to drown them both. Her tail curled around his wrist, a silken bind, and she leaned closer, lips parted, breath warm against his cheek. But a scream of metal shattered the dream. Ambassador Cryon stormed the dais, his Zarkath soldiers fanning out, their bio-armor clanking like a war machine's heartbeat. Plasma rifles glowed, their muzzles spitting sparks. In this farce, Cryon roared, his voice a grind of steel, his gauntlet aiming at the gem. The human taints her, taints us all. A bolt seared past, grazing Kael's arm, blood welling in a crimson line. He flinched but held fast, shielding Lyria with his body, his hand never leaving hers. "Stay with me," he growled, voice cutting through the chaos, eyes locked on hers. The gem pulsed wildly, their fires surging, a supernova straining to break free. Lyria's tail tightened around his wrist, her golden eyes fierce, pouring her strength into the bond. "Kael," she whispered, voice of velvet flame, "we're stronger than him. Together." He nodded, jaw tight, and they pressed harder against the gem. The chamber quaked, pillars of light fracturing as their fires roared. A collision of desire, pain, and love that defied the stars. Cryon fired again, the bolt striking the pedestal, and the gem cracked, its surface splintering like a dying heart. But Kael and Lyria held on, their hands locked, bodies trembling as the fire within them surged beyond control. A wave of flame erupted, a crimson tide that exploded from the gem, sweeping the chamber like a cosmic storm. The light was blinding, a vortex of scarlet and gold that roared with the pulse of their souls. Zarkath's soldiers staggered, rifles clattering as they collapsed, overwhelmed by a sudden flood of empathy. Kael's loss, Lyria's longing, their shared defiance washing over them like a tide. Cryon stumbled, clutching his helmet, his armor hissing as he sank to one knee. "No," he gasped, voice breaking, raw with something new, fear or perhaps awe. "This fire, it's too much." The wave faded, leaving silence, the chamber bathed in a soft afterglow. Kael and Lyria stood, hands still joined, chests heaving, sweat glistening on their skin. Her tail grazed his back, a final spark of connection, its touch warm, possessive. His jacket hung torn, blood streaking his arm, but his grin was fierce, unbroken. Lyria's gown shimmered, clinging to her like a second skin, her golden eyes blazing with triumph, and something deeper, love, unspoken but undeniable. Vera's light surged, her form pulsing with awe, tendrils weaving patterns of starlight. "You've done it," she said, voice trembling with reverence, echoing through the chamber like a hymn. "The flame binding is complete. Humanity is welcomed to the Conclave. Kael Varn, Lyria, you are the flame of peace, a beacon for our worlds." Delegates stirred, Zarkath lowering fists, Lumari glowing steady, Vulpari tails swaying in quiet respect. Cryon remained kneeling, his armor silent, his fire dimmed by the truth he couldn't deny. Kael pulled Lyria close, his arms circling her waist, fingers firm against her hip. "Told you we'd burn bright," he murmured, lips brushing her hair, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver through her. She tilted her head, crimson hair spilling like a comet's tail, her smile radiant, fierce. "And we're just getting started," she whispered, golden eyes locking with his, a promise that burned hotter than the gem's dying light. The chamber erupted in murmurs, not of dissent but of wonder, as if the galaxy itself had shifted. Kael and Lyria stood at its heart, their fires entwined, a blaze that had shattered walls and forged bridges. Cryon's defeat was a shadow, his ambition drowned in their light. The flame of peace was more than a title. It was a vow, a spark that would guide them through the stars, together, unbreakable. The observation deck of the stellar conclave jutted into the void like a blade of glass, its transparent walls framing a tapestry of stars that burned with silent fury. Nebulae swirled in the distance, their hues of violet and gold bleeding into the dark, as if the galaxy itself were painting a hymn to the night. Kael Varn leaned against the railing, his leather jacket discarded, his shirt clinging to a body still taut from the flame binding's fire. Sweat glistened on his brow, catching the starlight, and his storm-gray eyes held a quiet intensity, softened by triumph and something deeper, peace, perhaps, or love. Beside him stood Lyria of the Vulpari, her crimson hair flowing like a comet's tail, catching flecks of cosmic glow. Her gown, a whisper of silk, shimmered with every breath, tracing curves that seemed to hum with life, her tail swaying like a flame kissed by wind. The deck was silent, save for the faint hum of the Conclave's engines, a distant pulse that mirrored their own. Kael's fingers brushed the railing, cool against his skin, but his gaze was locked on Lyria, drinking in the way her bronze skin glowed, as if she carried a star within her. "Hell of a view," he said, voice a low growl, rough with warmth. "Stars, nebulae, the works. But I gotta say, darlin', you're stealing the show." Lyria's lips curved, a smile both sultry and soft, her golden eyes glinting with mischief. She turned to face him, her tail flicking to graze his hip, a teasing spark that sent heat curling through his veins. "Stealing," she murmured, stepping closer, her gown rustling like leaves in a midnight breeze. "Careful, Kael. Keep staring like that, and you might find yourself lost in more than stars." He chuckled, a sound rich with rogue's charm, and turned to meet her, his body aligning with hers, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Lost?" he said, voice dipping to a velvet challenge, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining with a sureness that felt like fate. "Lady, I'm already gone. You got me burning, and I ain't complaining." Her laugh was a melody, soft and vibrant, like embers dancing in a hearth. She tilted her head, crimson hair spilling across her shoulder, catching starlight in a cascade of molten hues. "Burning," she teased, her tail curling around his waist, a silken bind that pulled him closer, possessive yet tender. "Then let's see how bright you shine, Kael Varn." The air between them crackled, charged with a fire that needed no gem to blaze. Kael's pulse quickened, his free hand settling on her hip, fingers firm against the silk, grounding himself in her warmth. Her scent, spice and starfire, wild and intoxicating, hit him like a wave, tightening his chest. "So," he said, softer now, his voice a vow wrapped in smoke. "What's next for us? You dragging me to some Vulpari paradise, all moons and flames." Lyria's eyes softened, golden depths shimmering with dreams unspoken. She stepped closer, her body brushing his, the contact a spark that set his nerves alight. "The fire sanctuary," she murmured, her voice a velvet flame, warm and inviting, "where twin moons cast shadows of light, and flames dance on silver sands. But only if you take me to Terra first. Show me that wine under moonlight you keep boasting about." "Deal," he grinned, pulling her closer, his hands sliding to the small of her back, fingers tracing the curve of her spine. Her tail tightened around him, a vow of its own, and she rose on her toes, lips inches from his, breath warm and teasing. "Lyria," he whispered, voice rough with hunger. "You're gonna be the death of me. You know that? Then die happy," she breathed, and closed the distance. Her lips met his, soft yet searing, a furnace that melted the stars. The kiss was a collision, fierce, tender, a blaze that consumed time itself. Kael's hands roamed, one tangling in her hair, the other gripping her hip, anchoring them as the galaxy spun away. Her tail coiled tighter, brushing his thigh, a silken promise that sent fire racing through his blood. She tasted of spice, of freedom, of a future they'd forged in flame, and he deepened the kiss, a growl rumbling in his chest, claiming her as she claimed him. The stars bore witness, their light painting the deck in hues of eternity. When they parted, breathless, Lyria's eyes burned brighter, golden flames that held him captive. "Kael," she murmured, lips swollen, voice a velvet sigh. "This fire, it's ours. Forever." He grinned, forehead resting against hers, his breath ragged but steady. "Forever's a start," he said, voice low, a promise carved in starlight. Let's burn it down, you and me. A year later, Mars' colony pulsed with life, its domed plazas ablaze with color and sound. Terran guitars wove melodies with Vulpari flutes, their notes rising like sparks into the crimson sky. Holographic lanterns floated above, casting golden light across crowds of humans and aliens. Zarkath nodding to rhythms, Lumari shimmering in sync, Vulpari tales swaying in sensual arcs. At the heart of the festival stood Kael Varn, his arm around Lyria, her crimson hair glowing under neon hues, a beacon in the chaos. Her gown, woven from Martian silk, hugged a body radiant with new life, its fabric shimmering with every breath. Her hand rested on a gentle swell at her belly, fingers tracing circles as if speaking to the fire within. "Feel that," she murmured, guiding his hand to her abdomen, her golden eyes soft with wonder. A faint pulse answered, a spark of life that thrummed beneath his palm, fierce and alive. "Our fire, his fire." Kael's grin was boyish, storm-gray eyes gleaming with pride and awe. "Arion," he said, the name of vow, rolling off his tongue like a prayer. "Kid's gonna be trouble, Lyria, just like his old man." She laughed, her tail curling around his leg, a playful tug that sent warmth flooding through him. "Trouble," she teased, voice a sultry melody that danced with the music around them, or a flame that lights the stars. "He's ours, Kael, Terran steel, Vulpari fire." He pulled her closer, his hand settling on her waist, fingers firm against the silk. "Ours," he echoed, voice rough with love, his lips brushing her temple. "Gonna teach him to fly, to fight, to burn bright like his mom." Lyria tilted her head, crimson hair spilling like a nebula's glow, her smile radiant, fierce. "And I'll teach him to dance," she murmured, golden eyes locking with his, "to feel, to forge peace like his father." They kissed again, softer now, a quiet promise under the Martian sky. Around them, the festival roared, Terrans and Vulpari dancing, their laughter a testament to a galaxy reborn. Zarkath clapped shoulders, Lumari wove light into patterns of joy, and the air thrummed with unity, a fire kindled by two souls who dared to burn. Arion's pulse beat stronger, a spark of steel and flame, a legacy that would blaze through the stars, guided by the love that had changed everything.